Hello and welcome to Talking Telecoms. I'm Annie Turner, editor of Mobile Europe. Our discussion today is about what the future holds for the evolution and role of Open RAN. And we're going to talk about issues including why operators are accelerating deployments, the total cost of ownership, collaboration now and how this might change, and how Open RAN could become a platform for new business and operational models. With me to discuss these and other matters are NICOLA MARZILIANO, who's Vice President, International Telco Sales at Wind River, FRANZ SEISER, who's Vice President, Access Disaggregation at Deutsche Telekom, and Eric van Vliet, who's Director, Telecom Market Development for Asia Pacific and Japan, Europe and the Middle East and Africa at Dell Technologies. So a big welcome to you all, and let's get started. Nico, I think I'll start with you if I may. Open RAN is starting to happen, but so far it's been in niche parts of the market. How are Open RAN deployments coming along? And when do you think we're going to see larger scale deployments or more of them?
Hey, thank you, Annie. It's a good question to start with. In the market, there is a lot of discussion about O-RAN. O-RAN is now a little bit of a kind of buzzword. The recent study of Dell is just reporting a 6% of market share to be O-RAN, and the forecast is in a couple of years to become 40%. Now, how do you bridge from 6% to 40%? That is probably the big question mark the industry is posing itself. We see different approaches depending on the geography you're talking. There are certain geography like North America, which initiated already disaggregating the networks up to the far edge. So therefore the RAN side. On the east side, we see Japan and Korea following a very similar trend of the United States, the North America. And then we are now slowly but accelerating very fast the European market, where Europe is now fast adopting O-RAN technology, and we see already clients, including we see some partners here, start moving to this journey, as well as some parts of the Middle East, India, and other geography in the Southeast Pacific. So all to say, we see probably in the next 2-3 years, yes, 40% of the market to be O-RAN or to be purchasing O-RAN technology, definitely yes. Where are we now? We are still at the initial phase. We passed what we call the early adopter stage. We are now in between the early adopter into the more, the large adoption scales. Then the question is, how do we jump from the early adopter into the massive deployment? That is probably the key question.
Eric, I think you have some thoughts here.
Yes, and Nicola, you're absolutely right. And also, we see we've worked on a lot of proof of concept with service providers and with software providers on showcasing that Open RAN can also be used for a wider range of use cases, such as network densification, rural, or other use cases that we see in service providers applying for mobile technologies. And I think that these POCs, we see them also moving into field trials, testing this under real world scenarios. And I think the early adopters, especially if we look at Greenfield, they were able to move quite fast. And whereas the let's say the mature networks that have been out there, like such as FRANZ from Deutsche Telekom can echo, is that goes slower. But I think the steps are being made for large scale deployments, and I think that's where we are today with a lot of the service providers. Is we're testing this on their real world traffic to make that next step, like Nicola said, towards sort of the 40%.
Okay, thank you. So. I'm wondering, when will Open RAN become a relevant part of these developments, and what are the main drivers behind operators accelerating Open RAN implementation? Maybe FRANZ, you could start?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. Pleasure to be on this discussion here. I think Nico and Eric already shared a bit on what's happening, and that's very true. So some very first deployments have started already, mainly in greenfield for well-known reasons. But as said, so-called brownfields like us, we are catching up, and we are putting a lot of effort in making that happen, because we wanna really see O-RAN become a contender on eye level, if you allow me to say so, to existing solutions, basically as soon as possible. But that then needs to happen across the board, because O-RAN will only play a proper role if it really can compete in all dimensions, means capacity, customer experience, and cost. And only if you're really on the level so you can compete in all these areas, then it's going to happen. And as we all know, from our experience, the one big thing that still needs to be brought on the right level is all the topics around massive MIMO. There, if we're honest to ourselves, there is still a certain way to go. As said, as soon as possible, for I think many time discussed reasons. So I think there is no need to repeat all of them, but it's of course a lot about flexibility, getting us as operators back in control, being masters of our own destiny, having more choice, bringing innovation to market much faster, and bring the whole radio to become a kind of programmable platform. And I think we'll discuss a little bit more on that one during that session, but really bringing all these capabilities to our whole network, and knowing that exchange of a radio network is not a 3-month exercise, but in a big network, it's a multi-year exercise in the end. The earlier you start, the earlier you are there to have these capabilities available in your whole network. And that's why we are so pushy to get this thing ready as soon as possible.
Nico, you got any?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I think I want to highlight also a few more things in addition to what Franz just said about the technology. Sometimes, new technology or new ideas into the industry are coming from a convergence of different factors. So there is no one single bullet that is, triggering the shoot. It's we have a 5G, which is clearly accelerating the market requirement for distributed coverage or highly distributed coverage. Of course, power and energies optimization. Therefore, because you cannot go wild and having super power consumption. You need to have the best latency as you go, in a myriad of deployment. Therefore, you may have a better latency service, which again trigger service availability for enterprise, but not only for advanced use case. So all of those factors contribute to think about, okay, what's next? And the 5G technology, it's cloudifying further the networks. Probably there are a lot of people talking about softwareization of the network. So why the network, and Franz mentioned about the programmability. So the more the network becomes lesser a physical asset, but also a softwareization component. So it's a software factory where you cloudify and distribute the capability across the network. That's requires a certain technology that is supporting you. And that is exactly what the O-RAN is targeting now, to fulfill the 5G promise, to high availability, security, flexibility, but also, I would say, the other aspect that was partially mentioned before, which is maybe a lower TCO. So cost optimization, a better visibility of the various components, as well as being in control of your destiny. So choosing which is the best technology that is providing you the best service. That's, of course, trigger, in my view, the last or probably one of the challenge going forward, which is creating the right ecosystem of partners to create a new innovation, new idea, but also to make it sustainable. Because it's not anymore, one single company doing everything, but there will be a consortium of company delivering the solution.
So you touched on total cost of ownership there, and actually so did France. So could we just explore that a little bit more? Because there's quite a lot of debate about or around the total cost of ownership and Open RAN. So I'm wondering what the main cost drivers are regarding the total cost of ownership. And when do you kind of see it maturing to become on par with or possibly lower than, single RAN we've got now, if you like?
Well,
yeah, sure, happy to do. And here, as you already hinted a bit, you need to distinguish cost of ownership now, which is the very early stages, versus the cost of ownership in a much more major stage. And if we talk about now, having in mind this is still an emerging technology, so the ecosystem is still relatively small. The big new cost block that comes around, which you simply don't have in SRAN, or it's covered by your dear supplier, is the whole part of integration. You need to bring together the different things. There is not too much experience out there yet. So as of today, I, as an operator, need to take care about all these integration efforts, and integrating between different companies by nature is more complex than having one company having all the pieces and going through it through the development phase. That's clearly an issue. And also seeing it's still only a few operators deploying the technology, the cost has to be shared between them. The more major the ecosystem gets, the more that will be shared, and and on top, in order to simplify integration, there are all these discussions and preparations going on about certification and badging, so that in the future, if you buy components which have that, they work together. So you don't need to plan for a couple of weeks to make the things work flawlessly, which is in the end the cost driver. So that's one of the big blocks where we have some very good ideas, and there are initiatives going on. So this type of cost will go down as we look forward, for sure. But it will be different versus what we had today. Second one, Nico touched already, of course, energy consumption. But that, and you always have that if especially if you look at the virtualized baseband, the thing needs to develop. Things need to fit together, and we already do see massive progress here. And the good thing is, by separating hardware and software, you can much better anticipate and benefit from the pretty high speed in getting better on the hardware side, which feels much more difficult in a black box solution. So also there, we are pretty close, but it can get better. And number three, of course, also radio is all about scale. So the more scale you have, the more players you have, the more innovation you have, and innovation always helps to drive down cost of ownership. So these are the three dimensions I would see here to address.
Yeah, and if we're looking at the first part that Franz says, complex, I think every time when you disaggregate any type of solution, and especially when that distribute that among different vendors, there's a lot of complexity, and managing that ecosystem, but also managing the integration of a solution for, let's say, deployments. And I think the ecosystem is coming really together to do validation, to do reliability, to focus on elements of longevity and lifecycle management of the solution, but also how we can minimize the number of steps where we aggregate all the components together for the devices to end up at the cell site. And I think that's another thing where we, as an ecosystem, in Wind River, Dell, for example, we're trying to work together to make that as smooth as possible for the operator. So there's no need for an additional, let's say, company to take the components, but we can do that as an ecosystem. I think also building tools for managing distributed equipment to make sure that also there, during the life cycle of this equipment on these remote sites, we can reduce cell site visits that can be cost drivers and other things. And so I think, like like Franz said, the ecosystem is coming together to solve the complexity, which is in my opinion, one of the biggest challenges around Open RAN and a huge cost driver on TCO that needs to be solved.
Yeah, if I may, maybe just complementing and completing what Franz and Eric just said. Well, maybe reinforcing and repeating about the ecosystem. Interesting comment from Franz before. He was saying sharing the cost, because now, especially in these early adopter waves, everybody is doing its own exercise, and of course there is a lot of industry push to influence and to drive certain adoption. But then how those costs are shared, and who is bearing the cost for those initial investment? And that is absolutely a very valid point. That's also why Eric is saying, there are now creation of alliance and ecosystem play so that you can develop, pre-integrated, pre-validated, pre-lab staging capabilities so that you accelerate. So you don't need to do all these steps, since the beginning, because it's already done or checked, validated, integrated. So that is clearly it's a work in progress activity. There is a lot of learning happening. I think that we are now, after probably more than 2 years of field experience, we are now putting all this learning into the production side, if you wish. Therefore, we may get into a situation where those costs can be shareable in a way that the next operator will not need to go through the same learning or cost trajectory. But still, it's absolutely is a valid point. I think we are not yet there. I see the signal too, and as Eric mentioned, Dell and Wind River, for example, they are collaborating heavily on this aspect. But that is clearly, in my view, we are just in between. I want to also spend a little bit of time on the other topic, which was the TCO. We recently, I think a few months ago, we ran an analysis with Analysis Mason, and we did this TCO calculation based on some field experience. And of course, that is a preliminary, is based on a field experience, is based on knowledge of the market, but is based on a kind of snapshot of today. And there are always two aspects to consider when you go in a TCO assessment. The first one is what you have got today as a deployment. So is it going to be decentralized, centralized RAN technology versus what is the market readiness of today? And what we obtained is a theoretical saving for the initial adoption for example, in a business case of 3 years, which is in a range of 15 to 22%. But that can be even well above in the case of what Franz just said before about further radio unit, baseband optimization, so software activation, deactivation, transmitting, power transmitting, also optimization, and CPUs and silicon further optimization, as we expect the hardware to have a further cost innovation. So all of those may bring another level of potential saving. Of course, everything in this second wave is more theoretical, but what we have seen in the initial part is that is already materializing. And according to I don't know if France can be agreeing on this point, but definitely in a traditional RAN versus the future RAN, even a 5 to 10% can be already an interesting saving. If you go above and beyond 20, well, that's going to be a luxury, of course. But that is today's situation.
True, but going up beyond 20 has to be the target, to be very frank here. I mean, of course, there's a lot of money in radio, as we all know. It's the single most biggest cash out block in the mobile network. So yes, of course, every percent helps, but the ambition level has to be beyond 20, and I still believe that this is achievable, to be very honest.
Okay, so that's interesting. And collaboration, I mean, it's such a fundamental part of delivering an Open RAN solution, as we've talked about, sort of so that operators aren't having to relearn, and also the ecosystem to put Open RAN together. So have we developed best practices and common practices for early RAN development models? And do you see operators converging in the mid and longer term towards in-house integration centers? Do you think that will be necessary?
Oh, if we're looking at the collaboration, the learnings,
Yeah.
yes, I think we definitely have gone a long way of where we came from. We solved a lot of problems around integration. I think if we're looking at the different consortiums like Telecom Infrastructure Project or ORAN Alliances, we've seen service providers building, let's say, collaboration spaces where they could bring, let's say, people from the consortium together. Also, ourselves as Dell have been building our Open Telecom Ecosystem Lab, which is another space that we offer to service providers to not just collaborate during the integration space, but throughout the whole life cycle, maybe, of a solution, to take that a step further as well. But yeah, there's still a lot of learnings to be made as well, because technology is still evolving. And also, as we know, and we talked about TCO, we're far from there yet, from delivering the real cost savings that are, let's say, the ambitions at over 20%, as Franz said. So yeah, a lot of learnings done. A lot of the industry has come together. I think maybe Franz can talk a little bit more about the, let's say, mature in-house integration centers, but we've seen service providers building that collaboration space from getting to that foundation where we are now, and ourselves with partners building that lab as well under our own umbrella, obviously is another contribution to that collaboration space.
Yeah.
FRANZ, what do you think?
Sure. Look, as said, we are still a bit in early phase, but of course we take a lot of learnings, and things are developing. I think, I mean, if we say we want to get more control back on our side, it's pretty obvious that this is not coming for free, but you need to spend a certain effort, because getting control also means taking responsibility. Well, if that means that each and every operator needs to build an in-house integration center, I'm not so sure. That may also go well beyond the capabilities of certain players, and it's not required. So you need to take the responsibility yourself, or the accountability. That doesn't mean you need to do everything with your own stuff. You are still free to choose whom you ask to help you and to work with you, and how much you want to give to them. If you do too much, you may create a new kind of login, and some of operators may be even happy to do so. That's, I think, the option space is wide open, and we will see multiple different models. But the basic idea, linking that back to TCO, of course, should be, from my perspective, you only do the stuff yourself in your own responsibility that's specific to your deployment. 80% of this integration thing should happen on the community side. Otherwise, this is never going to fly. Yeah, if everyone is doing everything again and again, starting from scratch, that will kill the operator, but it will also kill the suppliers. How we are talking, bringing new players, and not only having a few big ones, but more also mid-sized one, maybe even smaller. But if you ask them to have a dedicated project for each and every of their customer, which looks different, that's not sustainable for them. So, and it's not required, because the base function of a radio access network is always the same. There is no need to reinvent the wheel all the time. Again, the idea is that then there is a certain part on top that helps you differentiate, that gives you this little bit better customer experience, fitting more and tailor more to specific customers. That's the stuff you do yourself, but that is 20% or less of the whole thing, and that's the thing you need to focus on. The rest, my view, needs to come from the community. Otherwise, the mathematics here will never work out.
Yeah, very well said, Franz. Interesting what you articulated in this 80-20, because I think, we mentioned at the very beginning, moving from a traditional RAN deployment to a no-RAN flexible disaggregated ecosystem, someone has to do this reaggregation, and some people confuse that with we need an SI, we need a system integration, which is not necessarily exactly the solution. So it's more thinking about a new way of delivering that process of reintegrating. Now, how you do that? I think what you mentioned, it's interesting because it's Deutsche Telekom is driving. I think Vodafone and the big five in Europe that signed the MOU are driving the same concept of creating readiness through these TIP group or the Oran Alliance group, creating labs where you can exactly share the knowledge and the pre-integration. I think that is the ambition. And we see the same movement even in Japan, and other operators are doing across the world, not only Europe, but doing this kind of pre-integrated, pre-validated, knowledge shared experience of pre-integrating, which means maybe it is not yet 80%, but that is probably the target of. At the moment, I still see a lot of do yourself. But yes, the target ideally will be to get a good 80, and then the remaining 20, 30, depending on the operator capability, to be in-house, retain it, because that will be exactly to fit to your specific network deployment, which will be unique to every operator, and sometimes even specific country of that operator, because that country may have an even different flavor compared to another one. So in my view, it's exactly rethinking the integration process. That is the key challenge. And I'm quite positive. As I said, I've seen significant steps and investment. I think Deutsche Telekom is one of those investing severely on this kind of ecosystem creation.
Yeah, so don't nail me on the 80-20, please. It's just to give you a certain understanding, and it also depends what's your own ambition. Where do you see yourself in the market? We especially here in our network in Germany, we have an ambition to have the best network. So which also translates we are willing to put effort into make sure we have the best networks. Other may be in a different position in the market. They may put less fine-tuning, let me call it like that. So they may even have less than the 20% they do on top. Others, because for whatever reason, I would be willing to put even more to do something for specific customers and make very sure that this is. So this is just a rule of thumb, but roughly to get a feeling where we should be. Absolutely. So it's not that you feel that everyone is starting from scratch, because this would be complete nonsense from my perspective.
I just want to look ahead a little bit to when you think that Open RAN will become a platform for innovative new business and operational models. And if you can give me any examples of how that might pan out, or how it is panning out.
Yeah, as said, it's of course, Open RAN is on the one thing to get alternatives and more choice, but if we don't see this as a pure cost-saving exercise, and that really don't want to see it like that, then we have to look at what is it enabling, and this is where this whole part of programmability come in. And if you look in the ORAN architecture, they have defined one, or if you're more specific, even two entities called the RIC, the RAN Intelligence Controller. There are two flavors, near real time and non-real time, but we don't need to go that deep into here. But what this thing is doing is it exposing an API on top of the radio. So that means you can really start to develop small apps, so to say, that influence the behavior of the radio for certain customers in certain areas, whatever other trigger events you may think of, to tailor-made the behavior of this whole machinery according to that rules. But that's not coming from your typical radio provider as of today. Today, for every change you want to have, you need to go to your SRAN supplier and have a long discussion. And if you're lucky, you get it. If not, then not. But you can now work with much smaller, maybe even do it yourself, depending again how you see yourself in the value chain, companies to develop these pieces of software. You can, it's not a one-to-one, so don't take it too, but to get a feeling, it's a little bit like the apps you have on your smartphone. See, and here, of course, only for radio, the vision is, of course, to have it for the complete network. that your network becomes a programmable platform via APIs, and this is the radio part for it. So you really can start to develop applications on top of your network that really define how the network behaves for certain customers. That's the vision, and here this is the radio contribution, as said, and that's really coming out of the O-RAN activity. That's the radio intelligence controller. That's the thing which I believe will completely change the picture and the nature of networks going forward.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we as Dell, we've been helping different industries transform, and transformation usually becomes available due to new technologies or new methodologies. Like in this case for FRAN, it's all about open and breaking the structure to enable an innovation. And FRANZ, I think you mentioned it earlier, around smaller companies that really can disrupt the status quo by doing something new. And the RIC, or just programmability of the network, will allow a service provider, in our opinion, to transform also the way they think about their customer, to a way that it's no longer connectivity that they're providing, but they're providing a service, an intelligent connectivity or intelligent service. And that is an interesting position to be in as a service provider, because from a customer base, you know, they have a huge customer base that have a need for connectivity, but it allows them then to start using that customer base and stepping out of the over the top model. And I think that's one of the big strengths that something like Open RAN will enable service providers monetize over the information, the data that goes over that connectivity, not actually the connectivity itself. And that is a very interesting position to be in. I think we're not sure yet what all those different apps could be, or the different services can be, but I think the technology is being prepared that is ready for a lot of things, with low latency, with high density capabilities, and big throughput. It's more about what does the subscriber or the enterprise need, and how can that be solved out of the network rather than out of on-prem or cloud or any other technology. How can the service provider be there? And that will definitely drive new business models for the service provider.
So yeah, it's kind of really putting the network back in the heart of it, really, isn't it? We've not been talking in those terms for a while now. We've been much more focused on cloud and core, and so that's quite interesting. Nico, have you got anything you'd like to add there?
Not really. I think that it's probably that is a long-lasting, I would say, dream on the radio side. FRANZ, I mentioned at the very beginning, you know, the lock-in where, if you're lucky, you go with the RAN providers asking for certain feature, and that was a monolithic vertically. And even there, when you know, some projects try to push at the edge of the radio connectivity, certain capability like a OTT solution that they can deliver a faster, quicker, prompt solution was very complicated. Technology was not there. I think that is something that in the past there was a trial by someone. Now we are in a situation, and the O-RAN is exactly promising to fulfill that expectation. So delivering the capability to open up those workloads, and because that is a cloud disaggregated, then you can really have a different capability, a different level at the software application, the radio baseband unit, the cloud infrastructure, but also at the hardware side. For example, one of the components that disaggregating and opening up the deployment of a radio station next to the client will really open for any kind of flexibility, including even running on different kind of hardware, which for the time being you need to use a radio station which is based on an unlocked proprietary hardware. Then you go pretty indistinguished, moving from one to the other. So that is the innovation we expect at all levels, from the software application down to the hardware side, which is amazing.
Yeah, so let's go a little bit further into the long term. And I'm just wondering what you think other ecosystem vendors and maybe operators as well. What do you think might come into the mix? I mean, I don't know, reuse for infrastructure for next generation services, developments in the ecosystem? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we covered a little bit already on these topics with the programmability piece, but to extend, of course, the vision is to have a real rich ecosystem, driving innovations, coming up with new solutions which can be tested and, if successful, rolled out at much higher speed. So kind of cloud type kind of development. Of course, there's still a lot of physics involved in radio, and if you need to physically change the radio units, then you still need to physically change radio units. That's not going away, or at least I lack fantasy to understand how this could happen. We are still a little bit bound by physics here, but really having this ability, and one thing we didn't touch so much here in that talk, but this of course would be key, that all of that of course has to work in a not only highly but fully automated manner. So the complete plan, deployment and run process has to run fully automated. So you have much less people involved into especially the run process, and then of course you need to put more brain in the plan build area, and you run that more or less like a distributed cloud setting, because all the feature stuff and defining what the customer experience is anyhow controlled by software. So the vision, of course, is then also to run it in a software style operating model, so to say, and that completely automated. So also all the maintenance and all this kind of stuff. If you want to bring more, of course, step by step, bringing in more AI and all these kind of things to really help to maintain best possible customer experience, regardless where you are. So always best connected, how we call that, in a fully automated manner. Supported, as said, by a real rich ecosystem, abilities to bring in new players, to credit the ones who overachieve, to give a bit more harder time to them which struggle, but to really have this in a really, as said, full software based ecosystem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about disruptor, smaller innovative companies. I think time to deployment of new services, because obviously we have critical services that the service providers provide to its subscribers that are impossible to break, which really drive the 5, 6, 9 availability that you have of a network. But then these experience services that improve the experience of the subscriber, being able to deploy those at a high speed and turnaround time will enable a much more richer ecosystem from concept to deployment. If we can shorten that time of those experience services, I think that will drive innovation with the network, right? That will drive this forward. But that can only be done, and automation is part of it, the ecosystem testing, but that can only be done if the deployment of those experience services does not disrupt those critical services that use the same technologies, the same radio access technology. So I think that's where we'll see over time the real acceleration happening, where we can go from an idea, a small one-person idea, and a company that gets started, a startup company, can actually create a experience service that then can be deployed by a service provider, and it doesn't take 3, 4, 5 years of time. I think that's where what cloudification means for let's say for the likes of that we see in social networks or other media on the internet. I think if we can get there with service providers as well, that will be a revolution for them and really open up the future for the networks.
And the last word to you, Nico.
Well, yes, thanks, Annie, and thanks, Eric and Franz. What you just commented, and especially you, Eric, in the closing, when you say, the new disruptor, a new company emerging, sometimes I was reflecting myself about also what Wind River as a company has been bringing into this O-RAN discussion, even though pretty established into the embedded world, the Wind River is still, coming from a different heritage. we position ourselves as a little bit of a disruptor. So one of those companies that even FRANZ was mentioning before, bringing innovation, bringing new ideas, and contributing into the ecosystem. Now, of course, what I do expect, Wind River is playing its own role, is gaining some experience. But what I can expect is that more and more company will emerge, because the more you go open, the more you offer possibility to open up with the API, with the disaggregation, with the cloud native, with the flexible architecture, the more there will be opening. And I think, Eric, you mentioned even one single person company can start finally bringing ideas, innovation faster, quicker, and to the market, which was absolutely a little bit of a science fiction exercise, like FRANZ was mentioning before, for the radio. So bringing really something that till yesterday or today was impossible to think about it. Of course, it's a little bit of futuristic, but there is a lot of truth beyond that. As I said, companies are emerging, and I expect more and more innovation to come, as well as more players to come into the party.
It sounds like a case of the more the merrier. I thought that was a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much, all of you, for your insights.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you all.